powerful.
It's your show. You should do it.
Yeah.
You should do what you want, obviously.
Okay, well, it takes about 1 minute for it to get going, and then
It's your show. You should do it. You should do what you
Okay.
want.
All right, so I'm about ready to introduce you now. We are, I believe, live. Okay. Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Let's go to Washington, D.C., but let's even go bigger. Let's go to the whole world. Let's go to the World Service Authority and see what governance would be like if we were all world citizens and we had an agency that took care of our needs and gave us documents and things like that. How would that be? Okay. Well, I'm going to talk to a guy who does exactly that. This is David Gallup. Hello, David.
Hi, Nada. How are you today?
Wonderful to meet you. Yes, I'm fine, and I'm looking forward to this. Because as I understand it, you are the president of the World Service Authority, which is, I don't think very many people fully realize what a wonderful agency there is for handling our legal problems and that sort of thing. So let's talk about what you do. I came upon you, I was directed to you by Arthur Kanegas, because I once joined briefly, I don't have time to do it very often, you know, his The World is My Country club. And he has a talk show or something like mine, and interviews people and has good conversations, very much like this. And he did one with you, and I found out that you had sort of been involved a very long time with trying to help people who want to be world citizens, and that this all goes back to a man named Gary Davis. And Arthur Kanegas's movie was kind of a biography of Gary Davis, one of the most extraordinary, remarkable human beings you'll ever come across, an amazing man. I just love that film. And so Gary Davis declared himself to be a citizen of the world. And he went so far as to renounce his US citizenship and try to get along just being a world citizen, going from one country to another. And of course, you don't do that without passports and without documentation. So what do? Well, you form an organization, or somebody had the brains to form an organization called the World Service Authority that would issue passports for the whole world. And I think that's just a marvelous idea. So let's talk about your work. You're president of this outfit, and you do a lot besides passports, but I just start at the top and tell the whole world what a wonderful thing you're doing.
Sure. Well, thank you, Metta. I really appreciate sharing on your show today with the global public the idea, or the vision of the organization, which is world peace and justice through world citizenship and world law. But as you mentioned, really the organization was founded, necessity is the parent of invention, right? So Gary Davis, who was a bomber pilot in World War II, when he came back from the war, well, one, his brother was killed during the war. He had to kill people. I mean, when you're in a bomber plane, you drop bombs. He was dropping bombs on Brandenburg. And these are people, he was an actor that he would have rather been entertaining and make laugh. Why was he forced to kill them? Why was his brother killed? Well, so he read a book called Anatomy of Peace by Emery Revish, is how it's pronounced, although in English it looks like Reeves, which talked about debunking all of the isms: nationalism, capitalism, communism, socialism, religionism, internationalism, all in favor of creating a global governmental system beyond what we have with the diverse 200 or so separated nation states. And Gary used to love to quote Emery Revish saying, the government world government is the first step. That is, it's the first step in, and it's the only step. If we want to have a world that's peaceful, we have to take that step and claim it. So that's what Gary did. He stepped out of this nation state system as an individual, which was a very scary and unusual thing to do. I mean, we've heard of a lot of people during later wars like the Vietnam War and ever since, people giving up their citizenship. But when Gary Davis did it in 1948, it was completely unusual. He was considered a war hero. Why would this person who was in some respects revered in certain ways for what he did for his country decide to do that? Well, so it was really those three things: the death of his brother, the killing that he did, and having read that book that made him get out of that system, that he felt like he had to get out of that system. But he went to Paris. He actually had to hand in his US passport. And then when he stepped out of the US embassy, he was in France illegally. And this is the story that, as you mentioned, Arthur Kanegis' film, The World Is My Country, tells. In its fact, it's mostly Gary on stage, interspersed with wonderful film footage from the era, talking to the audience about why, his heartfelt sentiment as to why he felt like he had to, in a sense, to save the world, he had to leave the system that the world had placed him in just by living in the 20th century and in the nation state system. So as soon as he stepped out of the embassy, he had no documents. And for many years, for about 5 or 6 years, he tried to travel around the world with simply no document, but he kept getting stopped at frontiers. And it was at that point that he said, look, I need to imagine something. I need to imagine a world where I belong, right? I mean, there's at least 10, 15 million stateless people in the world who are living the same situation that Gary Davis lived in. Not that they chose it, though. Gary had the ability to choose that. But many people don't. Many people are either made stateless by war, by rising sea levels, or by simply governments that don't accept those people as citizens of their country. So he said, I have to create a government of, by, and for the people of the world, sort of like what Emory Revish had said in his book. There is no first step to world government. World government is the first step. So he created this world citizen government, or he used to call it a world government of world citizens, back in 1953. And then just a few months later, at the beginning of 1954, he created World Service Authority, which is the organization of which I'm the president and chief attorney. And it was that administrative agency, the World Service Authority, that began issuing the World Passport. And here's a sample of the World Passport. And that really dramatically changed Gary Davis's situation. He was then able to have a document to go and travel around the world to share this idea of world citizenship and to try to build up an interest in this idea of how we can identify ourselves ethically at the highest level beyond any other allegiance, not to give up other allegiances, but to just add that higher coherence, that higher understanding. And by having that actually stopped all of the, not all, but a lot of the frustrations that he felt at borders, because as I say, actually, in that the film, The World Is My Country, I say, a border official will not stamp your hand. They want a booklet, a passport that they can stamp. So by creating that, it gave them the tool that they needed, that they were used to seeing, to be able to stamp it. And then he traveled to many different countries.
This must have been a rare thing, though, because I don't think in many countries, if when you get to the border and talk to the guys in a little glass box, they're going to stamp your world citizen, the world passport. What do you call it?
Your world passport.
World passport. Are they going? How many of them will do that for you?
Well, so 96% of all countries, which is about 188 countries, have already placed visa entry and exit stamps in people's world passports since 1954. Now, of course, we tell people, and we say this, Gary says this in the film, that the world passport is not always recognized. It's a tool like any tool. In a sense, Gary used to say, well, it doesn't work, you work it, meaning you have to know the system and your rights. You have to understand that you can claim these rights and that it's not always easy. So certainly in the wealthiest places in the world, like in North America and Western Europe, it is not that well recognized. But in other parts of the world, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, it continues to be recognized. And now that people are just starting to travel a little bit more since all the lockdowns due to COVID, we've actually gotten stamps in from individuals around the world showing that their passport had been recognized. In fact, one of the ones I'm so delighted to see very recently is from a refugee from Republic of Congo who his national passport had expired. He had come to the United States as a refugee. And this world passport was the only identification document valid document that he has now. And in it, U.S. Homeland Security placed not only a work visa, but a temporary residence in his world passport. If he didn't have this passport, he would have difficulty exercising some of his basic rights on a day-to-day basis, whether it's to own property or to conduct any kind of financial business, to even to travel. And so this document has been really, really helpful to this particular individual. So once again, it's not always recognized. We want people to know there isn't a guarantee.
Okay, no, I'm sure there isn't a guarantee, but in fact, I would think it'd be pretty rare, but it's certainly heartening to think that you say 96% of the countries have
recognized it.
And at some point, I guess the US has done so, maybe inadvertently.
Well, I can't imagine, especially this fellow's passport that had just really been recently recognized in the last 2 years. In fact, one of the stamps is valid through the end of this December. Let me put it this way. If you talk to some of the wealthiest national governments, like the heads of those governments, they might say, oh, we don't recognize that document. We don't consider that valid. But when they know that an individual is in a difficult situation, and this may be the only choice that person has, they can't get a refugee travel document. They can't get a document from the government that's persecuted them. This may be the only document that they might be able to carry. And for those people, especially the wealthiest countries, that would be when, on a humanitarian basis, they would stamp it. But you're right, though, not always.
How many people in the world would you say do lack other valid passports, national passports?
Yeah, we've done research on this, and the World Bank, who's also done a lot of research in creating new global identification for people because they see that's so important in people's everyday lives. They say about 1 billion people on the planet have no identification document whatsoever, never a birth certificate, nothing. And then, of course, probably the worst place in the world for people to identify themselves, meaning that they don't have identification or their government fails to or refuses to give it to them, is mostly in Africa, and especially sub-Saharan Africa, and in the poorest countries. The majority of the people who don't have identification document are women and girls. So it's gender exclusionary. It's based upon the structural violence, unfortunately, that's built into this nation state system that separates us all from one another.
And with the increase in refugees, that becomes a real problem for people who have to cross borders. Yeah. I just, a month or so ago, did an interview with Lloyd Axworthy, who is the president or chief or I don't know his title, he heads the World Refugee and Migration Council, I believe it's called. And one of the things I mentioned, we talked about the fact that I think he said there are 82 million people in the world who have crossed borders trying to get asylum or someplace to accept them. And that's not even counting the internally displaced people. 82 million, wow. Right. And so we talked about the difficulty of getting documentation. And I mentioned your organization, he hadn't heard about it, but he did mention something called the Nansen passport, yes. Which I gather was a legal document, would have been accepted maybe everywhere. Can you explain, I couldn't talk about yours because I don't know enough about it, but to what extent would you say the world passport that you issue, how does it compare to something like this Nansen passport, which I gather was issued for a short period of time?
Correct.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we love to say that the world passport is actually the successor to the Nansen passport. Fridtjof Nansen was an explorer, Swedish explorer, navigator, but he also became what we would know now is really the first high commissioner for Refugees, but it was part of the League of Nations, which of course then the UN took over some of that framework. But as what you might say, the first High Commissioner for Refugees, his goal
Sorry,
was
now this would have been at the end of World War I.
one. Yeah, it was in the 1920s, actually. Through most of the 1920s, his organization, his Commission for Refugees, produced what then, after he passed, was called the Nansen Passport, and it was issued to hundreds of thousands of people after World War I who were fleeing places where they might still be persecuted because of whoever, which side won the war. These were people who had no documents, and at that point, national governments really had no capacity to identify these people. And what's so amazing is he and his organization won the Nobel Peace Prize for providing this service to the global public. I think it was either 1928 or 1929 that they won the Nobel Peace Prize. So when Gary Davis took this idea up, you might say again, by creating the World Passport, it was initially to help refugees and stateless people like himself. But what has been really interesting to me over the years is that actually, although we do issue thousands and thousands of documents to refugees, to stateless people, to other vulnerable people, there are a lot of people who apply for this passport who simply want to self-identify as a human being, as a world citizen first and foremost, who don't need it, who like to show it to friends and family, who might show it in addition to their national passport to get stamps in it at frontiers to say, look, we are all one family, we are all related. Why don't we start identifying that way?
I love that idea. I just think that it would have to do your soul some good, even if you don't go anywhere.
Right, true. Well, it changes your thought process. It opens your mind to the world as a whole, to say, I'm not just from this one little town or city or whatever. When people ask me, David, where are you from? I say planet Earth. And of course, then they start laughing. And they say, well, where do you live? I say, I live in my body, which is true. I do live inside here. So it's a change of perspective, which I feel is desperately needed. I mean, we're seeing, and you handle this in every week when you have your podcast, you're talking about the different crises, whether it's climate, whether it's injustice, whatever it is, that's nuclear and war, whatever is impacting our world as a whole. I feel the biggest crisis really is that we don't yet have what I would call, or what Gary Davis would have called, a brain for the planet that will help us to guide us and guide ourselves into governing the world, which it's not being governed right now. Although you could say it may be being governed in the background, that there may already be sort of this hidden world government of powerful corporations and powerful wealthy individuals who can, just by where they place their money, can control how the course of human history, actually. And what we're saying is, no, we need to reclaim that power. We have it already. We just need to reassert it or reclaim it in a peaceful way and say, look, as world citizens, we can come together. We can start building the global structures and institutions of law that humans need to live together peacefully with each other and sustainably with the planet.
Well, the one thing you haven't mentioned is the United Nations.
Right.
And I wonder, I presume that your approach is definitely not, you don't have much hope of approaching this world governance through improving the United Nations. Is that the problem, or you obviously are going outside of that approach?
Well, so let me talk as if I were Gary Davis. He died about 8 years ago. He would have been 100 years old this summer if he were still alive. Yeah. But let me talk through his voice for just a moment, and then I'll go back to my voice, and because there is a distinction there, actually.
All right.
You might say Gary, because of the pain and suffering that he survived throughout his entire adult life, because of what happened to his brother, because of the killing that he did, he was, you might say, an absolutist about this idea of creating a democratic, federal, participatory world government, a world government system. And he wasn't afraid to use the term world government. There's a lot of people, what you might say in the world governance movement, who don't like to use the word government because they fear that it will scare people off, because people see how national governments treat them. They see the frustration and the anger and the bureaucracy, and sometimes the violence, of course, more times than often.
By the way, I would certainly not feel shy about using the word world government, but it would have to be considering the fact that what your organization is doing is in no legal sense a world government. Right now, I'm thinking the whole project of attempting to create a world system that manages us. I think the world government, it would be a subset term of world governance.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. It would be one. Yeah, you could define it that way. Sure. Well, so Gary would always say when people ask about the United Nations, well, why wasn't that the United Nations? The United Nations a government, you know, sort of a quasi government. If you've ever taken a tour of the UN in New York City, the headquarters, there's a brochure, and the first thing the brochure says is the United Nations is not a world government because it has no legislative power. And Gary would say, oftentimes in interviews, he'd say, oh, nations don't unite, only people do. And we're trying to get the people themselves to see the power that we have and to help us to unite. Now, he didn't have any problem with the agencies of the United Nations and all the amazing work that those agencies are doing to help people in the here and now, you know, on the ground who are suffering. Of course, having those different like Food and Agricultural Agency or the High Commissioner for Human Rights or the High Commissioner for Refugees, having those agencies is really important. But then after saying that, he would say, well, look, if those agencies could really do what they want to do, they wouldn't have their hands in handcuffs or tied behind their back by the nations who, especially the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, who can veto anything at any time for no reason or for what they might appear as a nationalistic, you know, saving reason. So Gary would say he didn't think that the UN was the way to go. That we need to start afresh. He would talk about how new ideas people will flock to if they are powerful, if they're good. You know, an example of that would be this tool right here, this phone. I mean, this wasn't created to get rid of you know, the typewriter or the laptop or the personal computer, but in some respects, that little smartphone has gotten rid of some of those things, not because it wanted to, but because it was a better tool. So that would be the Gary Davis viewpoint, that we cannot do anything through the United Nations. We cannot reform it. I mean, there's been more than 250 wars since the UN was founded to rid the world of the scourge of war. It's not the proper level. We need to move beyond the nation state to bring the nation states together. This is why we need to see ourselves as world citizens, as one humanity. Me as a lawyer, I think a little bit differently. I'm not so absolutist about it. And because of that, I am working with other organizations like the World Federalist Movement, like Citizens for Global Solutions. I'm on their board. And we are trying to develop institutions through the framework of the United Nations, like a world parliament. You've probably heard of the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly as one option. There's a World Citizens Initiative, which is to try to get people to petition the UN, and if there's enough signatures on a petition, that the UN General Assembly will take that petition and review the concerns of the world public. So I don't see a problem with working both to build an institution beyond it, a world government that is fully functional, legal, legitimate, as well as maybe working at the same time through that system. Why not? We don't know really in the end. I mean, you've studied peace you know, as a sociologist or anthropologist, your entire adult life, right? We don't know really what will be the pathway that will, in the end, lead us to world peace, because no one's ever created world peace before. Mm-hmm. So why not start going these different pathways and trying all of them?
Yeah, let's play with that a little bit. I don't want to deflect you from the World Service Authority too much, sure. But I am interested in the notion of a World Parliamentary Assembly, which would be an extra house. There's the Security Council, of course the General Assembly, but the Parliamentary Assembly would not, the members would not be nations, but citizens of the world. And it would be very interesting to think of ways in which you could have a person individually be represented without actually having their votes aggregated by territory, by nation. I've been very interested in that very question. And I think, you know, most of the people who want a parliamentary assembly to be adopted, and I don't see it happening right away. I wish it were in the cards, but it doesn't look very promising now. But they would say the first step would be to have each nation at least represented by people who are already elected as members of parliament of their countries.
Correct.
And then you could have a more direct form of governance, voting. And I was thinking, I like the idea somebody had of your birth date. Everybody born, I'm on August 29th, and all the people in the world born on August 29th would vote for the representatives of the August 29th people.
Oh, that's interesting. I
So
love that.
the World Parliamentary Assembly would have, I guess, 365 delegates. And I would choose the one that represents the August 29th people. And that way we'd get all away from the whole nation identity kind of thing.
Yes, no, you're right. There's been a lot written over the years about how to democratize the United Nations system, how to bring people in. And you're right. I know the group of people, which is called Democracy Without Borders, their first focus is, like you said, to bring in parliamentarians as representatives who are already representing the public. That would be their first step. But the ultimate goal would be to have a people's assembly voted directly from the global public, perhaps by their date of birth. Joe Schwartzberg, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, wrote a book about how we can democratize the United Nations using different weighted voting systems. There's also, I have a book here, which I'll show you, which you've probably heard of. It's the Constitution of the Federation of the Earth. There's a philosophy professor named Glenn Martin, who wrote this book, but he didn't actually write the Constitution. It was developed over many years. But that has another way of how we could divide the world up into districts, in a sense, and people within those different, not as it's divided now by country though, but people in those districts would also vote for representatives of their district, which would then go to a world parliament. So
there are all kinds of
great ideas on this.
Yeah, there are all kinds of schemes for trying to figure out what is the most democratic system for giving weights to different populations, so that according to some say the size of the population, but it also, most people think it has to be weighted by some other factors too. I think Hannah Newcomb did some work way back 30 or 40 years ago, trying to think of the most fair way of allocating weights to votes for a parliamentary assembly. Anyway, I've deflected you from your story. I want to get back to the World Service Authority, and also let me say that I didn't mention Rene Wadlow. I did a talk show with him not long ago also, and he is the first one of the people who comes to mind when I think of a leadership in world citizenship movement. Right. He's based in France now, and he writes articles for Peace Magazine quite often. So what is the connection, if any, between his organization? Is it the World Citizen Association, or what is it?
Association of World Citizens is his organization.
Yeah. Yes. Do you have contact and so on?
Oh yeah, in fact, we email back and forth. I don't think I've, maybe at a conference a long time ago, maybe the largest World Peace Conference in The Hague in 1999, I might have met him there. I can't remember now, but we do interact. We have a lot by email, especially in the last few years when he's been doing research for the articles that he writes. He might ask me. And so really, where does that Association of World Citizens come from? Well, I would really say that Gary Davis, when he gave up his US citizenship, when he interrupted a General Assembly session of the UN from the balcony, calling for a parliament of the people, and that made world news, that really launched the world citizenship movement in the mid 20th century. And then he created a registry of world citizens in Paris in 1949 with the support of people like Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, other famous American and French intellectuals who were backing him, and even Albert Einstein, who lauded him for the work that he was doing. And this registry registered in a period of almost 2 years, almost 1 million people as world citizens. But it didn't really have any like you were saying before, legal standing, you might say. It was more just to self-identify that, because this was before about 4 years before the World Service Authority was founded, the World Passport was founded, and even the World Citizen Government. So that Association of World Citizens, and there are other world citizen organizations around the world that also promote the idea that we are world citizens. I would say the one distinct difference, and people may argue with this, is that we are trying to actually create a legal structure, the legal institutions to back up the validity of a world citizenship identity or status, meaning we should be able to live, work, vote, whatever we do in any one part of the world, just because we maybe happen to be born there. If we move to another part of the world, we should be able to do those same things. Our rights, because they are innate, we are born with them, and they are inalienable or unalienable, as it says in the Declaration of Independence, meaning we cannot give them up. We cannot sell away our rights. They are in us as human beings. We should be able to carry those rights wherever we go. And that would immediately do, if world citizenship were a fully accepted, valid legal status throughout the world, it would end statelessness immediately. It may not end refugee flows, because people will still be having to flee if the seawater rises, if there are still local skirmishes and violence. People will still need to flee to go to another part of the world to find, obviously, a safe haven. But if you find yourself in a new part of the world as a world citizen with a full legal status, your rights would immediately be upheld. It would be like going from, say, Illinois to Indiana. It's a name two states here in the United States. If you're moving from Illinois to Indiana, no one's going to stop you. And when you arrive in Indiana, you can do the same things you did in Illinois, with the exception you might have to trade in your Illinois driver's license or state ID for an Indiana one. And it's just really to confirm to the local authorities that you're now part of that community and you plan to be there for a while, obviously. So really the point of this is to bring us all together, to say, when we travel from US to China or Canada to France or something, we're not going to another country. We are simply going to another part of the world. And I mean, Gary's book, and you mentioned this already. His memoir, My Country is the World, which comes from the Thomas Paine, who said, "My religion is to do good, and all my fellow citizens. I'm a citizen of the world. I'm part of this world. I'm a citizen of it, and I see myself as that." I mean, that dates back way back. I mean, there's even ancient Hindu texts that talk about being a cosmopolite, or a citizen of the universe, or a citizen of the world. Not just, I mean, even before the ancient Greeks. And Stoics talked about, like Diogenes talked about, being a citizen of the world. It's this way to, in a sense, remove the shackles that we put on ourselves, so that we can really be free as humans and work together. Why do we have 200 separate countries with their own science departments and their own militaries and all, in a sense, competing with each other? We're competing for fewer and fewer resources. We're competing for power, and that doesn't make sense in the 21st century, when one human finger could press a button and start a nuclear war that would destroy everything. It doesn't make sense in my mind that we're living in that kind of world.
Well, I'm 100% behind you, but you are a lawyer. And you say that your approach is to actually try to establish some sort of legal basis. Elaborate on that, because how are you going to do that? And is there some way of working through? I guess you have to work through existing international institutions and legal agencies or authorities in order to try to establish that. What's your game plan for making the World Service Authority really the authority service for the world?
Correct, exactly. Well, it starts with, as Gary would say, helping individuals to learn about who they really are. I mean, right here in front of our noses is the fact that we have this one Earth, that there is one humanity, and you might say there's one value, which is survival. I mean, at a very basic level for everyone. And if we do not at this point start recognizing through education who we are as human beings, that we have just this one earth, at least for now, this is our only home, right? We have to protect it. Then that third value of survival will go out the window. So really, it's a question of education. That's what I've been doing. I've been at this organization for 30 years. Gary Davis spent his whole entire adult life, almost 70 years, as a world citizen. Every letter that we write, every legal brief that we write to a national government to expose a violation of human rights, you might say puts a dent in the nation state armor. In a sense, we're not really trying to get rid of the nation state, because that will probably exist for a long time, but we're trying to help people understand that we need a common world law beyond the nation state, and common rule of law through institutions like a World Court of Human and Environmental Rights, like a World Parliament, like some kind of World Executive Committee. If we can build these institutions, then we can start working together peacefully. So it comes down to the very basic idea, if you want to talk about a legal idea, the legalization of this idea is two principles: jus soli and jus sanguinis. And that's spelled J-U-S and then S-O-L-I, and jus, J-U-S, and then sanguinis, S-A-N-G-U-I-N-I-S, sanguinis. So jus soli is the right of the land, or the right of the earth. Jus sanguinis is the right of the blood. And every single nation state, almost, if not all of them in the world, either uses one or both of those principles to determine who is a citizen, in a sense, who has rights. And the citizenship is, like Hannah Arendt used to say, it's the right to have rights. Basically, like here in the United States, there's both of those principles. You could, if you're born on the land, the jus soli, you are a citizen. But say you're born in an airplane over the ocean, or on an ocean liner, right, on a ship or something. If your parents are considered quote unquote American, you are also a US citizen because of inheritance, you might say. Now, there are some countries that only do jus sanguinis. You have to have parents or even grandparents that have that, quote unquote bloodline. Well, so what makes world citizenship a valid legal status? Under those two same legal principles, jus soli and jus sanguinis, one, we are born on the land, which is planet Earth. That makes us all human beings, right, first and foremost. And we're all born of human parents. So that our inheritance is those human rights that come to us simply by being human. Now, I would say, of course, just based on those two principles, that would be enough. But for people in people's minds and understanding, that's not enough. So this is why it's a question of, you might say, inculcating this idea of citizenship, not just at a local or domestic level, but higher than that. And whether it's like the tool of this World Passport, whether it's us sharing copies in multiple languages of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights so people know they have rights, it's a question of providing these, you might say, educational tools to say, look, we can be, Canadian, Ghanaian, whatever, Chinese, Peruvian, whatever, we can be that, but we're also something beyond that. It's okay. And the way to protect those other allegiances is to move beyond them. In fact, that's sort of through human history how wars have stopped, is because two tribes have come together to say, okay, let's stop fighting. Let's create maybe a bigger tribe. Well, you might say, what's the biggest tribe? Well, that's humanity. And that's so to legalize it is really both an educational task. It's to provide the tools that will help people to picture themselves as that, and to sort of have that human, you might say, patriotism, the pride of being a human being, which we see sometimes when astronauts go out into space, and when they're successful, humanity has this kind of pride, this overview effect. And that's what really excites me about current technology like virtual reality, is that everyone could potentially put on a headset, see the Earth from outer space, and see that little blue orb floating, that pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan would call it, floating in space, and realize we are sort of like a desert island. We have to protect this. This is all we have. And we need to, so my soundbite, I like to say, is why fight and die for a country when you can love and live for humanity and the Earth? Well, this is, so it's to take that idea, not only through education, not only through tools, but actually to develop those institutions of law, whether it's through the UN system or even outside of the UN system, that will be the ligaments of a future, whenever it happens, fully functioning global governmental system. So by even using the term world citizen government right now, we are saying we, the people, we can claim that power right now. There is no first step to world government. World government is the first step. We just have to claim it. We have to agree that that's what we want. And certainly we're at a level of still, though, educating. And that's why it seems so utopian, you know, why this, it seems unrealistic that we could get to this anytime soon. But some of the biggest changes in the way humans exist sometimes happen what can seem like overnight, just by either a new technology or a new awareness or a global pandemic that might force us to say, okay, maybe we're doing something wrong in how we treat our Earth and how we treat each other.
Can I ask you to dig into something about the nature of citizenship rights and what we mean by them? And because I've been troubled for ages by the fact that to be a citizen is always defined as being part of a particular territory or having a special, having special rights to participate in the decision making within a territory.
Right.
And with the rise of globalization, for example, this show, which people in all kinds of countries are on it, and we talk about issues that transcend national borders and so on. I've always felt, well, there have been times when I think I knew more about the government of Moscow than I did the government of Toronto, where I live. I'm not particularly locally oriented, and so I don't know who my city councilor is sometimes,
Sure.
that kind of thing. And I just voted in the Canadian election, but I'm very ambivalent about whom to vote for and so on. And I don't really have strong feelings about many issues that are bounded by territorial concerns. The potholes in the street, or who runs the school board, and what kinds of policies are made for the schools, etc. That's not my thing as much.
Sure.
But I care a lot about, let's say, the military policy of China, you know.
Right.
And I want to have a vote in China. Even I've been to China once for maybe a month in my whole life, and I'll never go back probably, but I want to have something to say about the military policy of China. And I would trade my right to decide who's going to run the local school board. I'd trade that off for anybody who wants to decide that. If I could get a chance to have something about the Chinese, silos that they're building for ICBMs. Okay, so
Exactly.
the whole notion that citizenship should be defined by where you either live, or I'm an American citizen too, but I haven't been in the U.S. for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. But I do vote, so that I take every opportunity I can to vote everywhere. But
right.
But really. I think that the right to make decisions or participate in the decisions of governance should be redefined in some way. And I think it has something to do with where your concerns really lie. And, I'm concerned about environmental matters, about military and foreign policy relationships, etc. Not so much about certain other things, So I've often thought that maybe votes should be allocated to people on the basis of the NGOs that they join. Because if I happen, all environmentalists would elect delegates or representatives that are environmentalists, and you'd have a panel of environmentalists to vote for. And for that, if you're going to vote on that basis, you have to give up your right to vote on some other basis, So that's sort of been an interest of mine for a long time. But I don't have anybody who talks the same way. And I don't know whether there has ever been really any kind of political theory that would try to redefine what the rights and citizens of citizenship decision-making authority, how much my vote should count for in what areas.
Mhm.
Has anybody ever talked about that? If you're trying to build a world government, you're going to have to decide who gets to participate in decisions about what. Not everybody is going to be participating in every decision. So how are you going to divide it up? Has anybody been working on that, or am I, alone in this?
Well, I think certainly Gary Davis created a World Citizen Party, which would engage people both locally or domestically, as well as globally, in the idea that yes, we have rights and we also have duties to our surroundings or to the planet, and that we should be able to be involved in the decision making, not just of what happens in Toronto, but what also happens in Beijing, like you were saying. It really should be both, because if there's pollution in Beijing, that's going to start traveling around the world and eventually get to Toronto, right? It doesn't go anywhere. It sticks around. And this has been the problem, obviously, with global warming. We all have a vested interest in how we handle our world. There hasn't, Gary Davis ran on the World Citizen Party platform for actually president of the United States, for the mayor of Washington, D.C. He actually got votes in both elections. And it was funny when he was, just a quick story, when he was on the podium with the two other candidates in Washington, D.C., Republican Carol Schwartz and Democrat Marion Barry, he would get up there and he would say, well, isn't Washington, D.C. a world city? Aren't we, because this was in the 80s, the 1980s, aren't we under the threat of nuclear weapons, that could impact our city dramatically? And then both of the candidates would be like, I agree with Mr. Davis, because he was achieving an understanding, a principle beyond just the local that would impact everybody. So certainly the World Citizen Party, which I have to say, unfortunately, we haven't done much with that yet. Although I was an individual in the United Kingdom reached out to me recently to see the World Citizen Party platform and to perhaps run for on a World Citizen Party platform in his local election. So we have done it in a small way, but certainly the idea of developing not just a parliamentary assembly, but a real world parliament, a parliament of the people, so that you could run for that seat and actually have a say in what goes on in another part of the world. A lot of people have talked about that over the years, and that Constitution for the Federation of the Earth in particular, that I showed you the book a few minutes back, that does talk about how in a global governmental system, it's always going to be a focus of the individual responsibility. So, for example, we see how when a certain government does something, and then other governments might go after that government by putting on sanctions. But generally, those sanctions don't impact the leaders of that government. They severely and sadly impact the people trying to exist on a day-to-day basis. I mean, look what's happened in Syria or in Yemen, or what's probably going to happen in Afghanistan if there are sanctions put back on there. It's going to really just only impact the people, the day-to-day person just living in towns and cities there. So what I'm saying is we need to develop a system where our individual impact can have an impact on the rest of the world. And our viewpoint is that is linked to our identity as world citizens and to governmental structures that, as we've said, are not really fully formalized yet, that would allow us to vote in global elections, and global elections not only for people who might represent us, in some kind of world parliament, wherever that might take place, but also to participate in global referenda. So it's not just maybe electing people to represent us, but actually participating in votes where our vote actually counts in a particular election, in a particular, take an idea, whatever that might be.
How do you know that? I mean, let's say I'm a world citizen. I certainly have that identity already, right. But that doesn't mean that, let's say, the people in Egypt are going to decide where to put their new airport.
Right.
Okay, outside of Cairo, there's a big debate, let's say, of where to put this airport.
Mhm.
I don't have any, that's not my business.
Right. Right.
I want to have some principle to decide what is my business and what is
Right.
not my business.
Sure.
I shouldn't be voting for where they put their airport. That doesn't affect me. But if they are building chemical weapons that they have plans to use, I want to have something to say about that.
Right.
So how do we allocate the rights of decision, of participating in decision making, that without doing it on the basis of territory? The simple answer is you draw a line on a map and you say, if you live inside this circle, you get to vote on these issues or for these delegates to your parliament. And if you live outside, you don't have that. You don't have a right to vote.
Right.
Well, that's a simple answer, but it's these days it's a stupid answer. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'd say there's a question of subsidiarity. I mean, there's the statement that says government governs best that governs the most local. So maybe if it comes to that airport, what your vote maybe either doesn't matter or you don't even mind not voting on that issue, right? Although there could potentially be some global environmental impacts if that airport is placed too close, say, to the Nile River or something like that. It could actually impact people in other parts of the world. So in a lot of decisions, I mean, maybe where you put a stop sign, okay, maybe that won't necessarily impact the rest of the world, but potentially an airport, which is a lot bigger thing, could. So, maybe we talk about, and this is just conjecture, about how people in other parts of the world could at least give suggestions of where they think for environmental purposes that airport should be placed. Maybe you don't have an exact vote in the final outcome of it. But you're right, there are bigger issues like chemical weapons or nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction that will dramatically have an impact. So maybe we have some kind of human linked with computer, whether it's AI or whatever, to determine what are issues that are strictly global, what are issues that are maybe global and local, and what are the other issues that are really mostly just local, and local populations should decide. I mean, what I like to bring up here is the idea that because people see the complexity of our world and how could we ever really govern it? Well, so I like to bring up the Universal Postal Union. And maybe you've heard of the Universal Postal Union, maybe you haven't, but if you've ever sent a postcard or a letter through the mail, you're using the Universal Postal Union, which in a sense is a government of the earth for the mail system. And every country has a domestic mail manual, an international mail manual, and it determines how a piece of mail will go from Washington, D.C. to Paris, France, or whatever. You have to do it in a certain way. You have to put on the postage stamp. You have to write the address a certain way. So you sort of, maybe as a child, from a parent or at school, you might learn how to use that system. Although we're not sending much mail anymore, I guess it's mostly email. But there's still sort of, even an email system has a system, a framework behind it that we may not even care about or know about. But there is a director general, a guy named Bashar Hussain, who's in charge, like the president of the Universal Postal System. We don't care who he is, as long as I send a postcard to my Aunt Millie in Tokyo. If she gets the postcard, I'm happy. I've paid my little fee to exercise my right to freedom of expression by sending a postcard. She gets it. Then that government, that world government of the post, has worked for me. So, I mean, the reason a World Service Authority has the name service as its middle name is that we see that government should be a service to all of us, to each of us, to everyone. If government is a service, it's not a question of power or who has control. It's a question of, is that government actually providing us with the capability to fulfill all of our needs, not just basic needs, but if you move up, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs up to self-actualization, all of our needs. And if it's not, maybe we need to change that government. Maybe we need to find different ways to govern. So I like to use that example because there is already, like I said, sort of world governmental systems that are functioning in the background, which can completely be not of concern in a sense. We don't have to be concerned that the Universal Postal Union is going to come with a marauding postal service army and take over, right? You know, not at all. We see that they're providing a service that we have to pay a little tax or a fee or a fine, you might even say, to use that service, but it's functioning. We don't really care who the head of it is, as long as it's functioning in service to the people. And that's the kind of world governmental system that Gary Davis envisioned, that we're still trying to develop through the World Service Authority. And I mean, Gary Davis was an eternal optimist. You know, up to the last day of his life, he was talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and how we have to know our rights to claim them. And one of those rights, of course, is to be able to govern ourselves. It's the will of the people that shall be the basis of the authority of government. But I think sometimes governments have forgotten that. Certainly the people have forgotten that. And I also think that governments don't necessarily want the people to know that they are the government, in the sense that we, the people, are the ones who determine our fate, determine the fate of the planet. And it's an awesome responsibility to have that. But it can be done in a way that is not totalitarian, that is not dictatorial, like the Universal Postal Union. Once again, we could have some kind of World Executive Council like they have in Switzerland, where there's 7 different presidents for the different cantons, right? That could help, you know, something like that extrapolated to the world level, that can help us to run the world, that can help us to decide what is strictly or mostly a local issue, what is really a global issue that really everyone should have a say in. But I mean, look at, you know, there's a couple billion people on the planet who are basically starving to death. They can't even think about, oh, I'd like to vote on this issue. Oh, I'd like to have an impact on, you know, the airport in Cairo, or the you know, weapons being built in you know, whether it's in, you know, Wyoming or Beijing or wherever, right? They can't even think about that because their basic needs aren't even being met. And that really is due to the system that we're working in now, that spends at least $2 trillion a year preparing for and waging war. I mean, so I guess because I know we're coming near to the end of our conversation here, that I would say that one of the main reasons why I'm even here talking with you was because of war. Gary Davis, you know, his involvement in war. He never wanted to ever have to see another human being suffer from war, either from any perspective of it. And that's why he devoted his entire adult life to exposing the war system, but that also providing a positive alternative, saying we can develop, if we choose, and it's all political will, it's all personal will, we can choose a different system. So I feel like my role, both as a lawyer and as a human rights advocate at World Service Authority, is to provide this education to the public so that we can see a different world. We can choose that. It's just a question of knowing it. I mean, Gary would always say, if you don't know your human rights, you can't claim them. So this is why in everything that we do, in every passport that we send out, for example, or every ID card or every World Citizen card that we send out to people around the world, we include a copy in the person's language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Mm-hmm. They can read that, because once you know your rights, including your right to vote and your right to participate in government, that really is an empowering tool, and an empowering tool to really change our world for the better.
I love what you're saying, and I love what you're doing, and I just think this is terrific. Tell people how to get in touch with you. Sure. And I'll put a little title thing at the page, end of the thing.
Caption. Sure.
So tell us how they can reach the World Services Authority and what they might want to contact you to get help with, because you're very valuable and helpful to a lot of refugees and migrants, but you do other things that could be useful to other people. Exactly. Well, so the main website is World Citizen Gov, which would be like an abbreviation for World Citizen Government. So worldcitizengov.org. That is our main website. And the email, which you can also email us or contact us through our homepage, is info at worldcitizengov.org. You are correct, though. We do have other aspects to the organization in addition to the documentation services that we provide. We have a legal advocacy team, which is staffed by volunteer lawyers and law students from around the world who spend 3 to 4 months with us going through human rights training. And then they use that training to help the public. So someone might write to us, like we've had some Angolan refugees who are trying to get permanent residence, and we will contact the immigration ombuds team, through like U.S. Immigration, for example, to help
expose where someone may be have been waiting ridiculously for 10 years to get their green card. That's ridiculous. We might intervene in those kinds of situations. We might petition an intergovernmental commission like the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which we've done on behalf of a group of Ogoni refugees. In fact, two different groups of Ogoni refugees, one in Nigeria, one in Benin. So we do that kind of service, the legal backup. We can't really represent someone as a lawyer, but we can advocate on behalf of people's human rights through legal briefs, amicus curiae briefs. We also have really our day-to-day education, and we have what I'm really excited about, and hopefully there'll be some students listening. We are restarting or relaunching our World Citizen Clubs. And this is an opportunity for high school and college or university students to create a club on campus that takes their interest and passion. It could be about climate change. It could be about injustices in the world. It could be about war. It could be about anything. It could even be about changing, local ordinances that are problematic, but that from a world citizen perspective. And it's not just advocacy. It's also supposed to be fun. So students could have potluck dinners, sharing their cultural foods and identities in those events. So that's actually a separate website, which is worldcitizenclub.org. And we're co-promoting that club with Citizens for Global Solutions and with a group called the Young World Federalists, which is the newest sort of group of several thousand people between the age of probably about 12 and 25 all around the world. So I'm so excited that not only are we doing things both for certainly adults in need, but we're also trying to reach out to the next generation of humanity to inculcate or to educate about this idea of who are we really and how should we be identifying ourselves so that we can both have a future as a humanity and protect our planet.
Wonderful. Bless you, David Gallup. Thank you so much. And
so
carry
much.
on.
My pleasure. This was such a delight to speak with you today. And I do hope to hear from all the watchers of your podcast. I'm delighted.